So John, in your opinion, what's wrong with the current Jiu-Jitsu standing game?
I believe there are three major problems with the current state of the standing game in Jiu-Jitsu. The first major problem that Jiu-Jitsu players face is a motivational problem. Okay, what is the motivational problem with standing game? The truth is, you can be a world champion in Jiu-Jitsu without knowing a single takedown. That's just the facts. Okay, there are world champions out there who have almost no standing skills. So there's an obvious question. Okay, if I don't need them, why should I learn them? Okay,
that makes sense.
We have partially answered that, which is the idea that, well, those who do have the skills have found creative ways to incorporate them and win matches with them. But that begs the question, well, what about the other guys who didn't have any standing skills and they became champions nonetheless? Okay, so admittedly, there is a motivational problem. That's the first major problem that we encounter with the current standing game. That if you look around you, you can honestly say that takedowns are not essential to becoming a champion in Jiu-Jitsu. Related to this is the idea that many students have a fear that they could spend huge amounts of time training the standing position and just never get an opportunity to use it. Let's say, for example, you spend 10 years developing a powerful drop seoi-nage, a beautiful uchimata, and a devastating taitoshi. Then you use them a couple of times in competition, everyone sees it, and they're like, oh, that guy's good at takedowns.
Yeah.
Just pull guard on him.
Yeah.
And so now you never get a chance to use them again. You just invested 10 years of your life, and now you never get to use them again. Okay, so that's kind of heartbreaking. There's a sense in which Jiu-Jitsu is unusual amongst grappling arts, that if someone pulls guard on you, you have to engage on the floor. Okay, in almost every other grappling art, that's unheard of. You can't just pull guard on someone, and if they did, if you walked away from them, that you have to stand up and fight from the feet. In Jiu-Jitsu, I have to go down to the guy. Engage, I have to engage. I can't just walk away. And so there is this motivational problem. Okay, if you get good at takedowns, you put in the time, you put in the effort, and it's going to be a long time.
And the guy pulls guard.
And then the guy pulls guard, and you never get to use it. Now, our answer to that so far has been, well, actually, history shows that people who are good at takedowns can find creative ways to get these takedowns into a game. Okay, but you're going to have to be creative in the way you do it. Okay, if everyone just pulls guard on you, you're not going to get these opportunities. But as we said, people like Rodolfo Vieira, everyone knew he was good at takedowns. Everyone knows Buchech's got a good double leg. Everyone knows Ronaldo Jacare had a good seoi-nage, but they found ways to get it to work. They found opportunities. They were creative in the way they did it. I still believe in that, and I believe history backs up what we said. But there is this motivational fear. So that would be the first problem of the current state of Jiu-Jitsu. It's a motivational problem.
That makes complete sense, John.
Now, Bernardo, if the motivational problem is the first problem, I would say the second problem of the current state of standing game in Jiu-Jitsu, it's a coaching problem. If you look at the way takedowns are typically taught in Jiu-Jitsu, you will see that there is a real problem with what I call the fragmental fallacy, or the fragment fallacy. This is the idea that in Jiu-Jitsu, takedowns are taught as an isolated skill, a fragment of the overall standing position. If you go into your average Jiu-Jitsu class, what you'll typically see is at the beginning of class, instructors will be, okay guys, here's a takedown. And they teach it, and then they move on to the ground, which is the serious part of class, and then they go to work. And so all they got taught was the takedown itself. Okay, there's no discussion of the skills required to get that takedown to work. It's just the takedown got taught. Now, Bernardo, if I came up to a beginning student and I said, okay, here's an armbar, and I took that student and I made them drill just the armbar for 6 months, every day, hours a day, and they just drilled the armbar. Okay, the only skill they had was just that armbar. And now I bring them into your class And I say, okay, kid, you know what an armbar is? And I point at you and I say, go armbar that guy. Do you think he's going to be able to armbar you?
Yeah.
No, he's not even going to get close. Why? Because he doesn't have any other skills
to get to the
to
armbar.
get to the armbar.
Okay.
In order to manifest a skill in combat sports, you have to have that skill embedded in many other skills that get you in a position to actually exhibit the skill. And this is a very obvious point. And yet, for some reason, this doesn't translate into our coaching of takedowns in jiu-jitsu. Guys just come in and say, okay, guys, here's an osotogari. And they teach the osotogari. Okay, you learn that, you're good. Now, when you drill the osotogari, your training partner is not resisting you. So it feels pretty easy. And you think to yourself, hey, I'm pretty good at this osotogari. And it feels pretty natural. Then you go into a sparring situation and you're like, oh my God, this is impossible. I can't even get this move to work at all. I can't even get close to it. And it's because you don't have any other skills. All you've got is a kind of limited knowledge of a given move. You don't have any skills in which it's embedded that get you to the position to do it.
Yep.
You can't learn jiu-jitsu in fragments. You have to learn the whole thing. This is true for any combat sport. And I hate to say it, but the way takedowns are coached in jiu-jitsu falls in line with the fragment fallacy. People get taught fragments of standing skills. Here's a takedown. Here's another takedown. Like, okay, that's great, but how do I get in a position to actually do any of this stuff? And that's just completely ignored. You can't coach along the lines of the fragment fallacy and expect your opponents, your students to start throwing people. It's not going to happen. The same way you couldn't expect someone to just learn an armbar and then go into a competitive match and armbar people. It's not going to happen. He's got to learn a whole bunch of other things. He's got to learn how to pass guard. He's got to learn the basics of stance, like how to hold himself. And there's a mountain of things he has to learn. And yet we do a good job on the floor of avoiding the fragment fallacy in jiu-jitsu, but we do a very poor job of avoiding it in the standing position.
Yep.
And that's got to change. So that would be the first aspect of the coaching problem. Now, there's a second aspect to the coaching problem, and this is what I often refer to as the add-on fallacy. Okay, if you look at the way standing position is coached in jiu-jitsu, you will see that there's a very obvious fallacy in the way that it's done. Your average jiu-jitsu coach tends to borrow moves from judo or wrestling and incorporate them into the sport of jiu-jitsu.
That's true.
Where the rules and directives are substantially different. Okay? How many times have you gone into a jiu-jitsu school and you see them teaching a basic single leg takedown for jiu-jitsu classes? Okay? That's great. Single leg takedowns are highly effective move, very effective. But they're using wrestling setups when the students are all wearing gis.
Yep.
Now, the wrestling setups work great with no gi. Now, suddenly, you got a gi on, the whole game's different.
Yep.
Like the whole gripping exchanges are different. The whole way you stand and stance and motion is completely different. You're wearing a goddamn jacket. Okay? There's no jackets in wrestling. Like the hand fighting of wrestling is completely different to the grip fighting of judo. It's two different oceans. Okay? There's Pacific over here and Atlantic over there. They don't combine. And so you see people teaching wrestling hand fighting to set up single legs when everyone's wearing a gi. It's not going to work. It's going to be a disaster. Then you see a similar mistake. You'll say, okay, let's start borrowing from judo then. And so you'll see people take on throws that work extremely well in judo. Say, for example, drop sanagi. Okay, that's one of the most popular and effective throws in judo. Now, drop sanagi can be a devastating weapon in a jiu-jitsu match. It absolutely can be. It's a great skill. But it can also get you in a whole lot of hot water.
You can't get her back.
You're turning your back directly to your opponent.
In judo, that's not a problem, right?
In judo, the rules protect you.
Yeah.
Okay, if you screw up a drop sanagi in judo, the referee will come in and save you. If you screw up a drop sanagi in jiu-jitsu, the ref ain't going to come and save you. The match is 10 minutes long, and you have just begun the match with your opponent on your back, ready to strangle you. Okay, that is an unmitigated disaster. Okay, Many of the techniques of judo are magnificent for the purposes of judo. Okay, now what is the purpose of judo? The primary purpose of judo is to score an ippon throw, which means to project your opponent onto his back with force and momentum. In jiu-jitsu, that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is to exhibit control after the takedown. Okay, a beautiful driving uchimata in judo, which catapults my opponent onto his back and shoulders with force and momentum, will usually result in a roll through, where having completed the throw, I end up in the bottom position.
Yep.
In jiu-jitsu, that scores 0 points.
Yeah.
0. And now you're underneath the guy.
Yeah.
You wanted to get top position with a throw, now you're under him. Good luck.
Yeah.
Match has just begun, you got 10 minutes, see you later. So the takedowns which are appropriate for the purposes of judo are very different. Even the grip fighting sequences for judo are designed primarily to stop the other person throwing you with force and momentum while allowing you to throw them. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, there are many grips appropriate for, say, guard pulling, which have nothing to do with stopping someone from throwing you. So even the grip fighting exchanges are different in jiu-jitsu. They've got different purposes, different directions. And so what you tend to get is most people just take a few skills from judo, wrestling, even sambo, and just add them on to jiu-jitsu. And, okay, guys, let's see what happens. Well, it can work. These are magnificent arts. No one loves judo and wrestling and sambo more than me. I'll sit down with a popcorn and a Coke and I'll watch judo and wrestling highlights all day. I love it, okay? But I'm also cognizant of the fact that a lot of the stuff they do can get you in hot water in jiu-jitsu, okay? And it can backfire pretty damn badly. So what we need to do is make damn sure, if we're going to add things on from other grappling sports, we've got to be smart how we do this. Yep. It can't just be like, okay, drop Sanagi, that looks cool. I saw that in a highlight reel from a judo clip. Let me bring that in, okay? We've got to be careful what we select. And we need to be tactically aware, is this appropriate for the sport of jiu-jitsu? Because it's a damn different sport. And this add-on fallacy needs to be guarded against. We've got to be careful what we add on. And it's got to be appropriate for the unique elements of jiu-jitsu. Now, I promise you, Bernardo, we'll talk more about what are the unique elements of jiu-jitsu soon. But this will be what I believe is the second major problem with the current state of jiu-jitsu standing position, the coaching problem. Okay?
No, that makes a lot of sense, John.
Yeah. Now, Bernardo, we've talked about the motivational problem. We've talked about the coaching problem. I would also say there is a third problem with the current state of standing game in jiu-jitsu. That's a training problem. If you look at most schools in jiu-jitsu, there is a huge disproportion between the amount of time invested in ground training versus standing training. Okay, most schools and most coaches tend to treat the standing position as a warm-up. Okay, class begins, you practice a couple of takedowns, and then you get into the serious part of class, which is the ground. And this is even more so with sparring time. Okay, the vast majority of schools, there is no sparring time in the standing position. And then when a competition comes up, you get a group of people together and say, hey, we're going into a competition, match starts standing, what are we going to do? They've got 2 weeks, and they look at each other and they're like, let's just pull guard.
Yeah, and I see that happen all the time, John, and I feel even sorry when the guy is ultra heavy, for example. Yeah. Because he can't pull guard, you know, like, and then he doesn't know what to do when he's standing. And he's pretty tough, but he's tough on top. But how he's going to get on top?
How's he going to practice this? Yeah. It's so I would say training time is the third big problem that jiu-jitsu players face. And also, Bernardo, there's a practical element here that we have to add in. Jiu-jitsu around the world is a club sport. Okay, now let's compare that with wrestling and judo. Wrestling and judo are Olympic sports. Okay, and many of the people with Olympic aspirations started training when they were 5. They began as children and they grew up performing the sport. Many of them in judo, for example, in Japan and Korea, they go through college playing judo. In the United States, they go through college wrestling. These are highly competitive academic programs, and they have a giant squad of people. If someone gets injured, tough luck. You bring in the second guy and he replaces the first guy.
Yep.
Okay? You can't have that attitude with a club sport. In a club sport, people come in and they pay money to train. You can't just, when someone gets injured, say, well, tough luck, see you later, I'll replace you now. You can't run a business that way. Moreover, many of the students that we teach are people who started late in life. I started jiu-jitsu when I was 28 years old. Okay, I started jiu-jitsu 28 years old with a crippled leg. For most people, it'd be pretty tough for them under those circumstances to suddenly start learning a hopping uchimata, a driving taitoshi, or a flawless haraigoshi throw. Okay, especially if you're only training that for a limited amount of time a week. So there are practical reasons why training time has to be a little bit lower. I'll give you an example. When you go to Japan and you see the competitive judo schools, especially the university judo schools, that's where most of the best athletes work out. You will see that among the young university athletes, the majority of training time, the vast majority of training time is done in the standing position. Okay? That's because they're all 19 to 21 years old. And as young athletes who have been training since they're 5 years old, it's natural for them to focus on the part of the sport which is most likely to bring you victory, which is standing throws. But when you go to other judo schools in Japan, where they're not college age anymore, let's say, for example, you go to the Tokyo Police Department and you work out in their dojo, the average age there is like 35 to 45. 90% of their training is on the ground, what the Japanese call newaza. They don't do a lot of throwing practice there because they're 45 years old.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, when you're 45 years old, getting thrown 300 times a day, it's not good for your body. It's not fun anymore. Okay, now when you're 19, it's not a problem. If you started when you're 5 years old, you're used to it. It's not a problem. What about a guy who started when he's 33?
Yeah, I agree.
And now he just wants to do this recreationally.
I agree.
Now you're telling this guy, okay, you got to take it 50 hard throws every day. Like, they're looking at you like, are you kidding me? Like, dude, I'm 35 years old. I got a wife and kids.
Yeah,
I got to go to work tomorrow. You can't train high amplitude throws with people like this. Okay, it's unlikely someone who starts at the age of 37 is going to learn a flawless drop seoi-nage. Okay, it can be done. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's the majority of people starting at this age. It's not really practical to start them off with like a hard driving Olympic level drop seoi-nage. It's probably not going to happen. That's something typically when you start much younger in life. But someone like this can easily learn, for example, a collar drag.
Yep.
That's a very doable goal for them. So there's a sense in which Jiu-Jitsu has pretty unique elements with regards to training time. It's a club sport. It's not an academic sport. It's not an Olympic competitive sport in that sense. Most of the athletes tend to start much later in life, and most of them play as part of a club where they join and it's a little more informal, as opposed to like wrestling for Iowa, where you know there's a lot of you. If you're not performing, tough luck, kid, get the fuck out. Okay, we can replace you in 5 minutes. There's 5 other guys who want your spot. Okay, it's just a different environment. Now, that's the best environment for producing competitive athletes. Okay, nothing gets people competitive like competition just to get on the spot for the wrestling team. When there's 5 other guys who want your spot, you're going to train pretty hard. So as coaches, we have to be cognizant of the fact that this is a club sport, and we have to build people through a different culture than we would if we were coaching a Japanese judo university or an American wrestling university team. It's a different thing. So those are the 3 main problems that I see a coach in jiu-jitsu when it comes time to teaching the standing game. There's the motivational problem, there's the coaching problem, and there's the training time problem. How much time are we investing in standing position, given that it's mostly a game which is won on the ground? And our ability to create an effective standing program with the feet to floor series is going to come down to our ability to deal with these 3 problems.